The morning sun was just beginning to warm the quiet streets of Harmony Creek, casting long shadows across Main Street as Rosie's diner opened its doors for another day. Rosie, a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The diner was her lifeblood, a cozy haven where locals gathered for breakfast and a friendly chat. It was still early, and only a few regulars occupied the red vinyl booths. Hank, the retired postman, was nursing his usual black coffee and reading the morning paper. Across from him, Martha and Carol, two longtime friends, were sharing gossip over blueberry pancakes. The bell above the door jingled softly, signaling a new arrival. A man walked in, and a hush fell over the diner. He was thin, almost gaunt, with a weary slump to his shoulders. His clothes, though not torn, were faded and looked like they'd seen better days. A weathered baseball cap pulled low shadowed his face, but Rosie could see the lines of hardship etched around his eyes. He looked lost and hungry. He hesitated just inside the doorway, as if unsure whether he should even be there. Rosie's heart went out to him instantly. She'd seen that look before, a mix of pride and desperation. She offered him a warm, genuine smile. "Morning, hon, come on in. Coffee's hot." The man shuffled in, his gaze fixed on the floor. He mumbled a quiet, "Thank you." These are the stories that built stool at the far end of the counter. This is a wing of tales. He didn't order anything, just sat there, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Rosie poured a mug of coffee and walked over to him, placing it gently on the counter. "On the house," she said softly. "Looks like you could use something warm." The man looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. They were tired eyes, filled with a deep sadness. He hesitated for a moment, then a flicker of gratitude crossed his face. "Ma'am, I don't have any money." His voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. "Don't you worry about that none," Rosie said, her voice kind but firm. "Everyone falls on hard times. You just take your time and warm up with that coffee. If you get hungry, let me know, and we'll figure something out." The man slowly reached for the mug, his hands trembling slightly as he brought it to his lips. He took a small sip, and Rosie saw a hint of relief wash over his face. She busied herself behind the counter, giving him space but keeping a watchful eye. Hank, Martha, and Carol exchanged concerned glances, but they respected Rosie's unspoken gesture of compassion. A few minutes passed in relative quiet, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the murmur of Hank turning pages. The man had finished his coffee and was just sitting there, staring blankly ahead. Rosie approached him again. "Sir, are you hungry? I've got a nice pot of chili on, or I could whip you up some eggs and toast." He hesitated again, his pride clearly battling his need. Finally, he nodded almost imperceptibly. "Chili, that sounds kind." Rosie smiled. "Coming right up." She ladled a generous portion of her hearty chili into a bowl, added a side of cornbread, and placed it in front of the man. He looked at the food as if it were a feast, and Rosie turned away, giving him privacy to eat. He ate slowly at first, then with more urgency as the warmth of the chili seemed to revive him. Rosie watched him from a distance, a quiet sense of satisfaction filling her. A small act of kindness, she thought, could go a long way. Just as the man was finishing his meal, the bell above the door jingled again. This time, 4 men walked in. They were young, clean-cut, and moved with a coordinated, confident bearing that spoke of discipline and purpose. They wore matching dark jackets with a familiar emblem on the chest, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. Their presence filled the small diner. Hank straightened in his booth. Martha and Carol's conversation died mid-sentence. The man at the counter, the veteran Rosie had helped, froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. The 4 Marines scanned the room, their eyes briefly meeting Rosie's, offering a polite nod. Then, their gazes all seemed to lock on the man at the end of the counter. There was a moment of charged silence in Rosie's diner, the significance of the Marine's arrival hanging heavy in the air, leaving Rosie, and everyone else, wondering what would happen next. A heavy silence descended upon Rosie's diner, thick with unspoken questions. Rosie instinctively wiped the counter with her rag, a nervous habit, her eyes fixed on the 5 men. The veteran at the counter, who had looked so frail just moments before, now sat straighter, a flicker of something old and formidable returning to his weary eyes. He slowly placed his spoon down beside the empty chili bowl. The 4 young Marines walked towards him in a tight, respectful formation. They stopped in front of the counter, their posture a stark contrast to the veteran's worn appearance. The one who seemed to be the leader, a sergeant with sharp, clear eyes, looked at the older man, his expression a mixture of profound respect and deep concern. Sergeant Major Thompson, the sergeant's voice was unexpectedly gentle, yet it carried across the diner with military precision. "Sir, we've been looking for you." The veteran, Sergeant Major Thompson, let out a slow, ragged breath. He looked away from them, his gaze falling to his own worn hands on the counter, a flicker of shame crossing his features. "You shouldn't have, Corporal." "I'm fine." The corporal shook his head slightly. "No, sir. With all due respect, you are not. We got a tip you might have passed through Harmony Creek. We've been driving these back roads for 3 days straight." Another Marine, younger, stepped forward slightly. "We were worried sick, Sergeant Major. The whole battalion has been asking about you since you left." Rosie, Hank, and the others watched, utterly captivated. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a rescue. This wasn't a vagrant, this was a sergeant major. Sergeant Major Thompson finally looked up at the young men standing before him, his brothers in arms. A lifetime of command and discipline warred with his current state of hardship. "My pension was compromised," he said, his voice quiet but steady now, admitting what he had hidden for months. "Identity theft. Cleaned me out. I didn't want. I couldn't be a burden to the Corps or to you boys. A Marine provides. He doesn't ask for handouts." His voice cracked on the last word. The lead corporal's expression softened further. "Sir, it's not a handout. It's family. We leave no man behind. You taught us that. You drilled it into us on every forced march and in every lecture. We don't leave our own." He then turned his attention to Rosie, who had been watching the scene with tears welling in her eyes. "Ma'am," the corporal asked, his voice full of genuine respect. "Were you the one who gave the sergeant major this meal?" Rosie nodded, finding her voice. He looked hungry. It was the least I could do." The corporal pulled out his wallet. The other 3 Marines did the same. "Ma'am, we'd like to pay for his meal. And for everyone else's breakfast this morning." He placed a $100 bill on the counter. His men followed suit, laying down more bills until a small pile of cash sat next to the empty chili bowl. Rosie held up her hands, shaking her head. "Oh, no, you don't have to do that. It was my pleasure. He served our country." "And you served him, ma'am, when he needed it most," the corporal insisted, his voice firm. "You showed him the respect he deserved when he was at his lowest. That's an honor debt. Please. Allow us." Rosie looked at the money, then at the earnest faces of the young Marines, then at Sergeant Major Thompson, whose own eyes were now glassy with unshed tears. She slowly nodded. "All right. Thank you, son." The corporal turned back to his former commander. "Sergeant Major. It's time to come home. We've got a warm bunk waiting for you at the base, a hot meal, and a team from the VA ready to sort out your pension fraud. We're not taking no for an answer, sir." Sergeant Major Thompson looked at the 4 young, determined faces. He looked at the half-eaten cornbread on his plate, a gift from a kind stranger. He looked at the small pile of cash on the counter, a symbol of a brotherhood that refused to forget him. The rigid pride that had kept him starving and alone for months finally crumbled. He nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. "All right, Corporal," he whispered. "All right. Let's go home." Two of the Marines gently helped him from the stool, supporting him with a quiet strength. The lead corporal gave Rosie one last, grateful nod. "Thank you again, ma'am. For everything." Then, the five of them walked out of the diner. The four active-duty Marines formed a protective escort around their elder, a living embodiment of their creed. They helped him into their vehicle and drove away, leaving the quiet diner and its stunned patrons behind. Rosie stood at the counter for a long moment, looking at the money they'd left. She picked it up, then walked over to the diner's charity jar for homeless veterans and pushed every single bill inside. Hank, the postman, finally broke the silence. "Well, I'll be," he said, shaking his head in wonder. "You just never know, do you, Rosie?" Rosie smiled through her tears, wiping her hands on her apron. "No, Hank, you don't," she said softly. "You just never know. But you can always choose to be kind." Outside, the sun shone a little brighter on Harmony Creek, its warmth a promise of a new beginning for a soldier who had finally been brought home.